Kieran. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Mehdi Hassan. I am the founder of a media company called Zeteo. Let me start with a quick poll question. Who here is a subscriber to Zeteo? Those of you who shamefully did not whoop, I hope you will all be paid subscribers by the end of tonight. And I say that everywhere I go, shamelessly, like a small businessman that I am now. But tonight, I'm genuinely serious about it, because tonight, it's not just about, me plugging Zeteo and saying, please support us. Tonight, you're going to see what we do with your money. Because what we are doing tonight and what we are showing you tonight, and this event tonight, would not be possible without all of you. We do not have corporate backing. We do not have sponsors. We do not have advertisers. We are fully subscriber funded, fully backed by all of you. So we wouldn't be able to fund a feature film, a documentary. We wouldn't be able to put on this screening here in this beautiful cinema without all of you. That is my pitch. As I say, the film will speak for itself. You can see none of this stuff is cheap or free. So we appreciate your support to do what we're doing. And look, this film is a super important film. You are the first people in the world to be watching it tonight. The embargo breaks at 8 p.m. Thank you. The embargo breaks at 8 o'clock tonight. International media, US media, Israeli media will be covering the story. We break a lot of stories in this film. It's a film about an icon, and it's a film about what happened to an icon and what happened after she was killed. Shireen Abu Akleh was a hero and an icon to millions of people around the world, especially in the Arabic-speaking world. One of the great journalists of our time. I think many people would agree with that. And she was killed almost exactly 3 years ago in Jenin in the occupied West Bank in May of 2022. An American citizen. Spent a lot of our time in New Jersey, not far from here. Joe Biden, former president, said if you harm an American, we will respond. He did not respond when Shireen Abu Akleh was shot in the head and killed in the West Bank. And as this film will show, there was a cover-up. As this film will show, there were things that the American government could have found out but didn't, but our team found out 3 years later. People say, justice for Shireen. I'm a believer, I'm a Muslim, I'm put my religious hat. God will do all the justice. We're doing accountability. We wanted to go out and find out who killed Shireen, what happened that day, what happened afterwards. And we teamed up with District Bear Media, with the wonderful Dion Nissenbaum, former Wall Street Journal Middle East correspondent, two-time Pulitzer nominee. And he, Samuel Jackson style, put together an Avengers team. Fatima Abdul Karim, Connor Powell, Atia Abawi, Sam French, Bo Malloy, Ari Flansreich. This was a fantastic team of people who got together and went out and did the work that our government should have done. And they did it for Zeteo. We were very privileged when they came to us. I want to say to Dion tonight, thank you for coming to Zeteo and coming to us with this project. And thank you for doing what you set out to do, answering that question. And a special thanks tonight to the Abu Akleh family, many of whom are here tonight. Tony and Lena and Victor, we grieve with you, we mourn with you, we stand with you. We hope, I will hear Tony's reactions afterwards. After this film is over, I'm going to speak to Tony up here and get his reaction to the film. And we're also going to have an all-star panel talking about journalism and coverage of the Middle East. My Zeteo colleague, academic, journalist, author of the new book, Genocide, Rula Jebreal is here tonight. My former colleague, the one and only man who makes me look like a midget, Ayman Mohyeldin, is here tonight. He almost had to miss a PSG game to be here, but he's here. We appreciate you, Ayman. And of course, Dion will be joining us for a panel discussion, so please do stick around. The film is 40 minutes. We're then going to have about a half-an-hour panel discussion afterwards. Then we're going to take your questions. So let me just say this. Zeteo has done a lot in a year. This is our 1-year anniversary. We're having a lot of celebrations. Thank you. We've done a lot. We've done podcasts. We won a Webby. We've done op-eds. We've done live events in London. We're doing one in LA next month. But without a shadow of a doubt, this is the most important journalism we've done since we launched a year ago. And it's a pleasure, a privilege, an honor to be with all of you here tonight.
Liking this video? Now don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to Zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
And I'll say this, the question we asked tonight and answered tonight is so important because today, another 2 Palestinian journalists were killed in Gaza. Noor Abdo and Yasser Subay, and over 200 killed now. And as the film points out, and you'll see, a lot of those deaths directly link back to the lack of accountability for what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh 3 years ago. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Please do enjoy the film. Now, we're going to kick off part 2 of tonight's event. We're going to speak to a very important family member who you just saw in the film, and then we're going to have a very important discussion about some of the issues raised in that film with our panel. And we're just, while we wait, I would do another reminder that the film comes out, actually right now. What time? Anyone know what the time is? I don't know what the time is. All right, at 8 o'clock tonight it goes out. The embargo is lifted. The film is available at whokilledshireen.com. If you want to tell friends, family, colleagues, contacts, that's whokilledshireen.com. It will be available there from 8 o'clock tonight, so please do subscribe and watch. And as I say, paid subscribers make all the difference. You saw that film. LA, Washington, DC, Ramallah, Jenin, Jerusalem. Investigative documentaries cost money, and a lot of people, you'll be shocked to hear, don't want to fund a film like that. Zeteo did, and we did it with your support. Thank you so much. And now we'll ask Shireen's brother, Anton Abu Akleh, to join us.
Can we make that ready? Can we make that ready?
First off, let me say to you, on behalf of Zeteo, on behalf of, I'm sure everyone in this room, especially after watching that film, our hearts go out to you and your family for the huge loss you suffered at the hands of Israel, the Israeli military, and as we've identified tonight, Israeli sniper Alon Scargio, who himself has since been killed. What was your, I'm just going to open and say, what was your reaction to watching the film that Dion and his team made?
Well, allow me first to thank everybody who participated in making this film and all the investigation, which is very conclusive, very revealing, new facts. It's very painful to watch it again. It's really 3 years past, almost 3 years. And during these 3 years, we were seeking justice. But now it's really shocking to know that the Biden administration, the previous US administration, was somehow trying to brush this case away. And they didn't want to pursue justice. We were promised justice and accountability, but their acts is definitely not what they told us and what they promised us.
So, I know you watched the film for the first time tonight,
Yep.
but the team did brief you and your family on the findings of the film. And there's a scene in the film we saw you're asked by Dion, what would you say to the shooter if you could speak to him? At that moment in time, you didn't know that he was dead. What was your reaction to finding out that the person who killed your sister, in cold blood, let's be blunt about this, in Jenin, was himself killed in Jenin? He's not around for you to speak to him or to be even put on trial if that were to ever happen.
Well, to be honest, it's very difficult for me even to look at this person. There is no reason for Shireen to be killed just because he has a rifle, unfortunately an American-made rifle, and targeting her in cold blood. I don't think this, based on this investigation, if he's the one who really killed her, I don't know if this is a person who will understand whatever you tell him. He has just a rifle and he is targeting anyone just because he can, because there is impunity and he's enjoying this impunity. And it's going to happen again. But for us, for the family, this thing doesn't end at one soldier who decided to pull the trigger. This goes in up the chain of commands for the
Yes.
military personnel, for the elected officials in this administration, and they should be held accountable for making such decisions and for allowing such so-called military to do such heinous acts without being held accountable.
When there's always this Israeli policy of it's just a bad apple, it's a rogue soldier, when, as we saw in the film, it's the rules of engagement that they sign off on. When you heard Joe Biden say in, I think it was 2024, I think it was in the context of American soldiers being killed in Jordan, Dion, correct me if I'm right, Dion's nodding. Biden says, if you harm an American, we will respond. You, as the brother of an American citizen who was killed, when you heard Biden say that, what was your response? What was your thought?
He failed every American family, not only my family, but every American family was failed by this administration. He didn't take any action, and we heard it was very clearly that it was never brought up with Bennett,
Yes.
with the Israeli
He was the Israeli Prime Minister at the time.
Prime Minister
yes.
at that time. It was never brought up. So he was, like I said, he was just covering up. They came up with this unintentional word, I'll put it between brackets, which we don't know how they came, how did they conclude it, where did they come up from with this word, unintentional? You know, we would love to see this investigation that the Israelis spoke about. We never saw it. It was never shared.
We haven't seen the US investigation either,
exactly.
as Dion points out in the film. And for me, that interview, I don't know how many of you watching there, the most powerful interview in that film is with the former Biden administration official, who's speaking for reasons of personal security anonymously to Dion, talks about it being an intentional killing and talks about the changes behind the scenes in the language. And that is truly shocking. I mean, we could have guessed it, we could have suspected it, but we have it here confirmed. Tony, I know you mentioned in the film, but just for the crowd here tonight, some of whom may be seeing Shireen's reporting for the first time, we see Shireen celebrating her birthday there at the end. Tell us about your sister. What was she like?
She was a beautiful person. I don't remember, or I'm sure nobody ever, she never harmed anyone. In fact, she was helping everybody. And we saw this in her funeral. The people who came out from Jenin all the way to Jerusalem, in every village, in every city, on the way, people came out to wish her farewell and goodbye. So, you know, I'm sure many of her friends here and many of the family members are here, and they can say many good things about Shireen. She was an angel. She was a real angel. It's really bad.
She was your only sister?
She was my only sister, yes.
When she was reporting in the West Bank wearing that blue vest, as a big brother, how did you feel? Were you worried about her? Did you used to tell her, maybe do something else, something less dangerous?
You know, the family were always worried about Shireen, but we know that she was very cautious. She won't go out without her vest, without her helmet. And yet, with all the precautions she took, with the full gear she had on, they were able to intentionally target her and kill her, to silence the voice and the reports she kept going out. This is not just targeting Shireen, but it's a systematic targeting of journalists. We saw what's going on in targeting journalists in Gaza and in the West Bank and everywhere else. It's unfortunate to see this at this time, and especially, like I said again, the failure of the previous US administration is very painful to us. It's failure for all the American family, for every American family, to hear promises from Biden, from the world's greatest country leader, and he wasn't able to fulfill, or he didn't even try to do any investigation to bring those responsible to justice.
I have no idea what Joe Biden is doing in his retired life, but I do hope this film and its contents reach him in some way. Tony, your sister did do a very dangerous job. She did it actually for her people. I know I've seen interviews where she talked about doing it for the people of Palestine, and she made the ultimate sacrifice, and she shouldn't have had to make that sacrifice. And we remain in awe of her. I've seen this now, I think 12 times. Kieran and I, the team, have seen this many times, but watching it tonight, it reminded me again of how important she was and why it's so important for us to continue to try and hold people to account for her death. Tony, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming to attend. Tony and his family flew across the world to be here tonight, and we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone who came here.
As we await for our panel to come down and join us, I just want to say a very special thanks to two of my colleagues without whom we couldn't have got this film across the finish line. Kieran Alvey, who you saw before, and JP Raymond, who worked tirelessly with District Bear Media, with Angelica, with all sorts of people to get it done. So thank you both for this important film. As we wait for people to get mic'd up, I'm just going to remind you who's coming up now. We have Dion Nissenbaum, reporter of the film, former Wall Street Journal Middle East correspondent. After that film, I think it's fair to say Dion is quiet but deadly. Then you have Rula Jebreal, who isn't quiet, and I love the fact that she isn't quiet, one of the best, loudest voices we have, speaking the truth to power. You see her on CNN panels. You see her at Zeteo. She has a book out called Genocide. It's out in Europe right now. It's not out in the US. So congratulations to Rula on the book.
What would you like us to say?
And we have, wherever you like. And we also have my good friend Ayman Mohyeldin. Give it up for Ayman.
Yes.
One of the only honest voices on the Middle East left on cable news. Give it up for Ayman Mohyeldin of MSNBC. Now surrounded by 3 women co-hosts, Ayman. That must be interesting.
No comment.
Like the Israeli military, weird. Kidding. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for being here tonight. There's so much to discuss, not just about the film, but some broader issues. But Dion, I'm going to start with you. You came to me last year, you came to Zeteo, and you said, you and Connor and others, and you said, we want to make this film. It's almost like a true crime. We want to go out. The Shireen story has been told in many ways. Al Jazeera have done a fantastic documentary about Shireen Abu Akleh's killing. There's been, CNN did a really important forensic investigation about the targeting. What's new? And you said, but no one's ever named the shooter. No one's ever found out who did it. The Israelis refused to share it even with the Americans. And I said, all right, let's make the film. It's going to be tiring. It's going to be exhausting. It's going to be expensive. And I said to you, we probably won't find out who the shooter is, but it'll have been worth doing the film. You went and found the shooter, you and Ari and Connor. Were you as surprised as I was?
No. I think I'm the only person on the team who actually believed we would find the shooter, but I had confidence in our team. This was a team effort. Ari, Fatima, Connor, the people you see on the screen, everybody working together. I was confident that we would find it. But first of all, before we go into this, I do want to say thank you to you and Zeteo, because as you said, you are one of the few people out there that are supporting this kind of investigative journalism, and it would not be possible without you doing that and without Zeteo being around. So thank you for being here and supporting this kind of work. Please come here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. And let's just get to the moment in that film where you find out not just the name, but that he himself, Alon Scargio, this former Duvdevan soldier, sniper, was killed in Jenin, the same city where he killed Shireen Abu Akleh. That must have been a crazy moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's, as we say in the film, there's a lot of irony around the fact that he was killed there. People will find out that he was buried as a hero because he was seen as rescuing a bunch of his soldiers who were killed on a roadside bomb. The thing that stuck with me, and I think stuck with a lot of people tonight, is that what he told us was that after he died, that members of his unit used her photograph for target practice. She was a journalist. She was unarmed. The Israeli military apologized for that, and still they saw her as the enemy. They saw her as someone to treat as an object. And to me, that spoke to the mentality of the Israeli soldiers in these situations. And to me, that's quite chilling. And I think you see that playing out every day in Gaza. As you said, 2 more journalists killed today.
It's fascinating because that anecdote that you obtained in 2024 but it happened in 2022, but it explains so much of what happened in Gaza in 2024. When you see how Israeli soldiers are behaving in Gaza, you're like, oh, that makes sense, because they were doing this in 2022, we just didn't know. The dehumanization of Palestinians and taking pleasure of target practice. Ayman, you knew Shireen. What was your reaction to watching that film?
There's a lot of mixed emotions, but I think the most important emotion was the soundbite that I heard from Fatima about who Shireen was, and how she carried her life and the integrity that she brought to her profession and the bar that she raised for other journalists. Because I remember when I went to work in the Jerusalem bureau for Al Jazeera English around 2007, 2008, journalism is a bit of a competitive industry sometimes, and journalists always try to one-up each other. But when I arrived in the bureau as somebody who is half Palestinian and had covered the story, but not necessarily very familiar with the intricacies of the story and the lay of the land and how things operated, Shireen and honestly Javada, another incredible journalist who works in the Al Jazeera bureau there, and the team welcomed me with any kind of rivalry, and they took me under their wing as somebody who knew nothing about the story, and made me feel extremely welcomed, shared with me every time I had a question, shared with me their contacts. So for me, watching the clips of Shireen's humanity, which I think sometimes in the discussion about who killed her and the accountability, which are extremely important, sometimes gets lost. A lot of her work, obviously most of her work, was in Arabic, and so it doesn't translate into English. But I am confident that if an American audience knew the work that Shireen did and was able to watch how she reported and how she conveyed the story and the struggle of Palestinians to an audience, I think it would have had a profound impact on people in this country and people in the West who, sad to say, for the most part, still remain uninformed and unaware of what is the daily reality for Palestinians under occupation.
Well said. Rula, you are a Palestinian. You are, I think, still a citizen of Israel. Am I right in saying that? I can't keep track.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. You were a citizen of Israel at one time.
Yeah.
When you hear about Israeli soldiers using a dead Palestinian woman journalist's face for target practice, as someone who, I've seen you go out and you have to debate some of these freaks, what is your reaction when you hear about that?
Thank you for calling them freaks. First of all, I'm not surprised. Naftali Bennett, the prime minister at the time, is the guy that said, I killed many Palestinians, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's the same, excuse my language, asshole who went in parliament, said to a Palestinian representative, Ahmed Tibi, he told him, we had a state when you were swinging from trees, so I'm not surprised. This is the kind of dehumanizing language. I just want to say and add something about Shireen. She was the voice of Palestine. Everybody in Palestine knew her and knew Javada. Javada went to school with me in Palestine, in East Jerusalem, at Dar Tifel. So we grew up watching, obviously, we grew up in the first Intifada, but we grew up somehow, every generation after us watched these amazing women reporting the events on the ground every day. So imagine you're a Palestinian family eating your dinner, open the television, and they become part of your family. They're the voice, the ambassadors we had to the external world. And I remember during the first Intifada when there's a lot of, journalists from, international journalists coming. We really didn't have a lot of Palestinian journalists. Then Al Jazeera became a platform where there's so many Palestinian journalists, and these two amazing women were absolutely the ambassadors, were the voice. And they were much more popular than any leaders we had. That's why for her funerals, people didn't go to work. Thousands of people showed up. Her funeral was as if you were burying a head of state or a hero. And that's what she represented to all of us. That's why she's still alive in our hearts.
Do you believe, Rula, as Ali, her producer, says in the film to Fatima, that they silenced her because they wanted to silence the voices of Palestinians? Today we lost 2 more Palestinian journalists, over 200 killed. Is that a deliberate strategy by Israel they've already blocked foreign journalists from going into Gaza. West Bank's another situation. But is this all part of one concerted strategy to silence the voice of Palestinians, not just politically, but journalistically?
Absolutely. Listen, the whole purpose of journalism is to hold powerful people accountable. So if you have people with cameras, with videos, with films, filming the crimes, they don't want the world to see the crimes. I mean, I remember very well, and I'm sure Ayman remembers, in 2000 when they invaded Jenin, the first thing they did, I don't know if you remember, guys, the first thing they did, they basically blacked out Jenin. There was a media blackout. They wouldn't allow people to go. And I remember our colleague, Bobby Roche from Time magazine, he tried to sneak in, and there was a soldier pointing basically the rifle at him. And he said, there's nothing personal. I know you're Indian, but there's nothing personal, but we can't allow you to see. Ariel Sharon at the time wanted Jenin to be shut down to the world. They didn't want any eyes and ears. For me, the most powerful sentence in this movie, when I think somebody said, what's happening today in Gaza, the killing of 219 journalists, basically because they got away with murdering, targeting, executing, and killing in cold blood Shireen, because we had, excuse my language, a shameful president at the time, Joe Biden, who decided that it was okay to kill a Palestinian journalist, an American Palestinian journalist. He covered it up as much as the Israeli did, and he paved the way, basically, for what's happening today in Gaza. They got away with killing an American citizen. And I wasn't surprised, actually, that you found the soldier for one reason. For the last 19 months, we saw Israeli soldiers, and whoever speaks Hebrew like myself can read the disgusting posts, how they brag about the crimes that they are committing. Now they went from hiding that crime to putting online and celebrating and glorifying their crimes, including killing children. So I'm not surprised. And if they continue to get away with this with a genocide, this will become a global doctrine, and all of us are unsafe. All of us are endangered.
Well said. Dion, I mentioned Ali Samoudi, the producer who you and Fatima interviewed in the film. You texted me the other day and said, hey, he's been arrested. I was like, oh, wow. Like a week before the film's coming out, he's been arrested. It's become much worse since then. He wasn't just arrested and detained at his son's home. He had to go to hospital because they took him without his medications. His family say he's been tortured. The Israelis are making all sorts of classic evidence-free claims and smears about he identifies with a militant group, which I don't know what that means. He's currently still in detention. A, what do we know about his situation? And B, that line he says in the film sounds even more prophetic than when he said it, which is they're trying to silence us. Literally him.
Yeah, exactly. He does talk about that in the film. He says that bullet, and Fatima also talks about this idea that these bullets are meant to not just kill someone, they're meant to silence all Palestinians and create fear in them. And Ali says in that they partially succeeded. And now, a week before the film comes out, he's arrested. He is considered one of the most respected journalists in the West Bank. He's still being held without charge. He was apparently handcuffed to his hospital bed. He was in court, and they remanded him without charge. And you see this evolution of the Israeli strategy that Rula is talking about. And the other thing that's shocking to me is that the current Israeli military spokesperson tweeted out something around December saying, wearing a blue press flak jacket does not turn a terrorist into a journalist. So he sent a message publicly that wearing the blue flak jacket that we've all worn no longer provides any protection for you. It makes you a target. They've identified journalists as combat propagandists in Gaza and targeted them, not armed militants. These are people that write, and they're calling them combat propagandists. So you see this evolution, and really nothing is being done to stop it.
No, and we are going to go to the audience shortly, but Ayman, I do want to bring the conversation home a little bit. Rula talked about ambassadors and having voices. You and I had many conversations, both on air and off air, about the importance of representation. These days, DEI is a dirty word in the United States of America. Can't have diversity, equity, or inclusion. But something I've always admired you doing, and you've continued to do it, and I know I've watched the new show that you launched. Last weekend was the first show, am I right in saying? Even on the new show, you are making sure that voices are being heard, the discussions are being had. How important is it that while, okay, Shireen is reporting in Arabic, as you say, and Americans are unaware, but there are a lot of Palestinians in the United States who are educated, informed, eloquent, passionate, experts in their field. Rula is just one of many. You have worked hard to platform a lot of those voices. How hard is it in the US media across the board, in print, in TV, just to get Palestinians on air to tell their own stories?
You mean as journalists or non-journalists? Both. I think both. It's a very, there's so many layers to it, and I wish it was sometimes as easy as a stroke of a pen to say, hey, we can just have these voices on the air, right? And I'll start with the kind of journalist part of it. Sometimes the challenge is to get Palestinian-Americans to believe, and not just Palestinian-Americans, any member of any community to believe that their voice matters enough to impact the change. Because I think when you watch and you look at the landscape of American media and you don't see yourself represented and you don't see the viewpoints there, you'll say, well, why would I want to be a part of that? Why would I, based on what I've heard and what I see, there's very little change, there's very little progress that's being made. And so there's a kind of self-selection process. And, it's great to have companies like Zeteo, and I really mean that. It's great to have companies like Zeteo, but we also need people not just to go to Zeteo, we need people to kind of continue to work at the New York Times and MSNBC and CNN and all the American networks and local TV and local newspapers and local radio, because it's getting involved in the mix and being in the newsroom that you can say, wait a minute, this is not correct, this is not the reality, and be able to contribute to them. The other aspect of that is, and I'm not trying to put it on the community, I'm saying like that is just one part of it. Then there are the structural problems within news organizations that genuinely for the longest time have not gone out to try and seek diversity and try to say, hey, this is a story that we're so heavily invested in that we want to understand. Let's try to understand it fairly, equally, and have people from both sides of it represented. I think one of the most important things that I remember as a young producer learning from Christian Amanpour that has always stuck with me is this line that don't be neutral, be truthful. And I think we, and you've pointed this out before in the past, there is a false sense in American media to say we need to be neutral about everything, as opposed to how do we become truthful about the stories that we cover. And it's a challenge because, as I was saying, you want to have people participate in the process, in the editorial decision making, and not just be on air, but to be producers, to be writers, to be executives, to be involved in every step of the process in the decision making, not just to focus on just being reporters. So that's one part of it. The second part of it, as I mentioned, obviously the structural problems. And then the third part, I think, is also the capacity to have people, not just like Rula, but to have organizations, to have institutions. And we know how much institutions are coming under attack right now, whether it's in academia or media or what have you, or even NGOs. You need to have more capacity that are organizations that are building that capacity so that organizations like us, and this is not a knock on journalists in general, but sometimes they just want to take the low-hanging fruit and they don't want to spend a lot of time saying, hey, who am I going to go out there and find that is going to do this kind of work, and to go out there and find the organizations that are going to be able to speak up and say, we need to get to the bottom of it one way or the other. So
I think you're 100% right to say we need people all across the media in the mainstream. I mean, when I founded Zeteo, Tucker Carlson founded a media company called the Tucker Carlson Network, very modestly, he called it. And he said, the mainstream media is dead, corporate media is dead, come join us on it. That's never been my position, right? I think there is an insider-outsider role to be played here.
Right.
And, I value the role that you play at MSNBC. I was sad to see Joy Reid leave MSNBC. Ali Velshi is one of my heroes and friends of ours, right? I think you're doing, but what's frustrating, and I think for a lot of people in this room, is when you look at the media since October 7th and say, well, who's had the Palestinian voices on? It is Joy Reid, or it is Abby Phillip, or it is Ayman Mohyeldin, or it is Ali Velshi. And it's like, where are the kind of white folks stepping up to help? Not you, Dion, you're fine. There is that sense, right? It sounds cliched to say, well, you want to see people who look like you on TV, but it is you, and it is Ali, and it is others who have done the heavy lifting to make sure that there is at least some Palestinian Arab representation. There are shows, and we don't need to state names, but there are many shows who have done many discussions about this subject and have never had a brown voice on even once. We know that, right? So that requires, as you say, people on the inside pushing, people like yourself having the platform. Okay, correct. Brevity.
No. I mean, it's true. You are making a very important point, which is, newsrooms reflect the people that are on the inside. That's one. But also wanting to understand the story is a second part of it. And I'm not saying that people who don't platform the other side or the Palestinian story are not seeking to understand it, but there is a certain and a natural sympathy to Israel in American media that is not extended to the Arab world. And I say that not just about Palestinians. You know how hard it is to try to get American media interested in covering Yemen or Sudan or, for almost 20 years, Iraq. I remember what happened, and I covered Iraq extensively. I covered the invasion. I covered the aftermath. At some point, when the Americans withdrew from Iraq, they didn't care anymore about Iraq. And trying to get coverage about Iraq was extremely difficult because America felt like it was no longer vested in that story, and politicians wanted to move on from Iraq, and certainly Afghanistan as well. So it's a systemic problem that I don't want to just kind of limit to the Palestinian-Israeli issue, although that is one of the most visible problems.
The good news is, according to Reuters, the Trump administration plans to borrow the Iraq model for Gaza, is what we're discovering. We're going to have a Paul Bremer for Gaza. Rula, let me just ask you this last question to you before I let Dion wrap up, and we go to the audience. You've been on the media a lot talking about Gaza, giving a different perspective. I saw you at the table with the world's worst commentator, Scott Jennings, recently. And on Gaza, dare I say, what is the game plan? What is going to happen next in your view?
I wish I'm more optimistic, but they've been telling us all along, the far-right government, what they wanted to do. Anybody that was listening, anybody that paid a little bit of attention knew for years what was the plan. You don't need even to be a genius. They actually, unlike the left in Israel, whatever they call themselves, the labor, they were like hiding the real agenda. The right are shameless.
I was going to say we should stop calling them the far right. This is the Israeli government. They've been in power for the last 30 years. And I think and calling them far right kind of implies that they're somehow, they're just an exception to the rule. I think the Israeli society has moved to the far right.
Yes.
That is the norm. So if we get a government that is somehow left, we should refer to them as like this exceptional left government in Israel's history.
I don't think there's a left or the opposition in Israel.
It's just like this is the Israeli government.
And, for me, it was clear what they wanted to do. It was 2020. 2018, they passed the nation-state law where they basically said Israel controls the whole territory and they have exclusive sovereignty and only for Jews. And I remember the discussion in the Knesset, Palestinian Israelis inside Israel, they formed the parties, they voted, and they had 15 basically seats for the first time. The head of the party was debating in parliament that law was racist. The guy that approved the law or backed the law, Smotrich, stood up and looked at him and he said, your presence here is a mistake. We did not finish the job in 1948. And that's the moment where it was clear to me that they're coming for all of us. So if you are asking me, they're going to finish the job. They said they want to finish the job. You know what the job is? Extermination. That's the job.
Smotrich said just a few days ago that it's not practical to starve everyone to death.
Yeah.
Didn't say it's a moral objection. He says, I don't think the world will let us starve everyone to death. It's funny when people say, Ayman, you made such a good point about far right. Often when you quote Smotrich, and you know this in the US media, people will say, apologists for Israel will say, well, no, he's just the finance minister. He's not part of the war. Can you imagine if Scott Bessent said, we're going to drive out all black people out of America? And they were like, well, he's just the Treasury Secretary. Doesn't really matter, don't ignore him. Dan, I want to give the last word to you before I open up to the audience. You set out to make this film. You came with this pitch. You say in the beginning of the film, you are someone who's been in Yemen, you've been in Gaza, you've been all over the place. What brought you to this story? What made you feel that this is a story we have to tell?
I was covering it for the Wall Street Journal at the time with Fatima, who covered it directly. She was at Shireen's funeral. She was friends with Shireen, and we were both disturbed by the way it was covered, the way people misunderstood it, the Israeli obfuscation. To this day, people don't understand the Israeli government. The Israeli investigation was that this Israeli soldier in an armored vehicle at 200 meters, protected, not coming under fire, intentionally fired at her. They say that she mistook her for a militant, falsely identified her as a militant, and intentionally shot her. That is what the Israeli military investigation found. I would question whether 10 people out here could tell you that answer, because in everybody's mind, she was caught in the crossfire, and it was a mistake, and he was aiming for somebody else. He was aiming for her, and he intentionally shot her. That is the Israeli investigation, and that's what we set out. That's what we want people to take away from this and understand.
There's that chilling moment when the soldier says to you, if you have a camera, that's enough.
Exactly.
I hope this gets out there. I hope you can all help us tell this story. I do want to open it up to our audience. I think we're going to get some microphones on stands because it's such a big theatre here at the Angelica. We're going to ask you all, if you do have a question, to come forward. We're going to steal a couple of mics and we'll share down here because we've only got 4 mics. But we're going to set up a couple of stands. Mo, can I get if you can hear me, can you get one mic to Fatima, please, while we wait for audience? While Mel sets up the other mic for audience member. Can we just go to... I do want to bring in Fatima Abdul Karim, who's in the audience. Mo, she's up here in the middle. If we can get a mic... Can we all give it up for Fatima Abdul Karim, please? Because we're going to... Many of us in this room are going to go home to our homes in New York or Washington, D.C. Fatima's going back to the occupied West Bank to continue covering this story, and as we saw in the film, risking her life to do so. So Fatima, thank you for your role in this film. Thank you for your reporting. Thank you for your bravery. And before I open up to the audience, I just wanted to ask you, what did it mean for you to make this film?
This is a personal story for me because Shireen was a colleague, was somebody I looked up to and a friend. The way that Shireen's killing was covered did not do her justice. However, the whole narrative around Shireen's personality and her integrity, her profile as a person and as a journalist grew farther even after her death. After we lost her, we learned more and more about what accountable journalism is really like or should be like. The psychological strain that Shireen's killing has left on all of us, on all Palestinian journalists, and I want you to think for a moment, what could we now know or understand about what's happening in Gaza without our colleagues covering there, is exactly the point that it's the single Shireen moment that every one of us is constantly thinking about in the background of their heads. Whether you are, no matter what kind of job you're doing or where you are, you could be targeted like Shireen, or in your house, finishing your coverage of an invasion into Jenin's city like Ali Samoudi last week, and arrested and being stained. Everybody who knows this veteran 58-year-old journalist will know that he has no political agendas. He's a journalist who is now being, I would say, is going through a character assassination. These are the different kinds of assassinations that Palestinian journalists are going through in Gaza and the West Bank and elsewhere.
Fatima, thank you so much for your courage and bravery. And I also want to say, can we give it up for Connor and Atiya from District Bear Media that put this film together, who are there. And there's a microphone stand if people want to make their ways to the two microphone stands on either side to ask questions to our panel. While we're waiting for people to head to the microphone stand to ask questions, I should say, since we're recognizing people who put Palestinian voices, Arab American voices, Muslim voices on air, I do see Amy Goodman and Nermeen Sheikh from Democracy Now! Give it up for the Democracy Now! Folks. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on Democracy Now! Tomorrow morning, and so is Dion, talking about the films, and there's a little plug for the show. Thank you both. All right, lady there in the microphone, you can go first.
Thank you for making this film.
You got to speak up to the microphone, unfortunately, so speak as close as you can.
There is a quote I've heard from Mohammed regarding Shireen Abu Akleh, which says she was killed twice, once by the Israelis, and the second time when we started referring to her as the American. So I guess in this light, I'm curious at the end why you chose to cite the number of dead Americans but not the number of dead Palestinians.
So I think, I'll let Dion come in there, but just to clarify, at the end, we cited the number of dead Americans, and then we cited the number of dead Palestinian journalists to make the point that she had two identities, one as a journalist and one as an American. And the American identity was important because, of course, Joe Biden said that if Americans are harmed, he would respond, and he did not. Not only did he not respond, and I'll hand over to Dion here, they helped cover up the killing of an American citizen. I don't think anyone would suggest that if she wasn't an American, her life was any less worthy. In fact, I think I opened tonight by talking about Noor Abdo and Yasser Subay, both of whom were killed today and were not Americans, but were Palestinian journalists. But I'll let Dion respond as well about that end slate.
I think that's exactly the point. We wanted to emphasize that she was an American and that we would expect, as Americans, our president, our government to come to our defense and stand for us. And she was a journalist. And we do say that 200 more journalists, Palestinian journalists, have been killed since her death. And the point, we are trying to make exactly this point that the Biden administration's failure to stand up for a Palestinian-American journalist, clearly targeted and killed by an Israeli sniper, has led to what you see happening now. The other thing, you make a point, the other thing that really bothers me about this is that there were independent journalists at the scene who told us at the time what happened to her. And because they were Palestinian, they weren't believed. And it became, well, the Israelis say this, and I went back to look at the coverage, and the Palestinian Health Ministry says this. But what the journalists at the scene told us happened at the time is exactly what happened. And
can I add something? I don't know if you all remember, Joe Biden soon after went to Palestine, Israel, and then he had a trip to Saudi Arabia. The journalists that followed him, because the president the press corps, they were not allowed to ask questions about Shireen. Then they went to Saudi Arabia, and they were allowed to ask questions to the Saudi ruler, to MBS, about Jamal Khashoggi. So again, Joe Biden called MBS because of Jamal Khashoggi. He said that he is a dictator, I believe.
And he said he was going to be a pariah.
He was a pariah. He's going to make him a pariah because of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. The same Joe Biden went to Palestine, did not meet the family, an American family. They did not meet with him. Yes, after they were welcomed, but he did not meet with them locally. Just remember those facts.
Yeah.
And I remember very well also the ambassador at the time, he basically was nowhere to found, and whoever managed to reach him said, we're so much we're under pressure. Under pressure by whom? By the Israelis. They were covering up the murder of an American citizen.
Just one other point I would make, Rula's been saying all night, forgive my language, so let me say this, forgive my language. Just to go to the nub of your question, I don't expect Joe Biden to give a fuck about Palestinians,
Yeah.
but I do expect him to give a fuck about American citizens. And the point is, he didn't give a shit about either in the case of Shireen Abu Akleh. And I think that's one of the things that drove us and Dion to make this film. And I think Fatima makes the point, by the way, that you made so beautifully in the film about the attack on Palestinian journalists' credibility is so offensive. And one thing that has bothered me since October the 7th is this idea when people say, well, we don't allow journalists into Gaza. You must rephrase that. We don't allow foreign journalists into Gaza. There are journalists in Gaza doing the reporting that others are being prevented from doing and risking their lives. Let's take a question from the lady there.
Hi, my name is Anne Bernard. I was the Jerusalem bureau chief for the Boston Globe when Dion was covering Israel-Palestine, and I was the Beirut bureau chief for the Times for a long time, and I covered the war in Gaza in 2014, and I could go on about that, but what I wanted to raise is how far back this issue actually goes. And I know Diana knows what I'm going to say, and Ayman too. Anthony should be, speaking of Arab American journalists, he tragically died in Syria in 2012, but 10 years earlier, I think it was 2002, he was shot in Ramallah while reporting, while alone in an empty street with his our colleague Saeed Ghazawi, who was also ended up being stuck with him, trapped under a siege. There was a whole story trying to get them out. At the time, I was really proud of the Boston Globe because they had Anthony publish a piece in the Boston Globe magazine about what happened to him, and it went pretty hard in terms of, by the standards that existed, in terms of pointing out some of the power imbalances in a more straightforward way than usual. That's actually when Anthony and I started to be friends. I remember talking to him like, wow, you got a lot of good stuff into that. But I do also remember that he wanted to go a lot harder on his point, on his strong belief, and it seems to be well backed up, that he was intentionally targeted as an Arab flag wearing suspect in 2002. And so the question I have is, did the case of Anthony Saeed come up in your reporting, and were there other cases of American or other journalists being deliberately targeted over the years where this could have been raised much, much earlier by the media or by the government? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anne is an incredible journalist. She's brought compassion to covering the war in Syria and Gaza, so thank you for your work, Anne. This was a continuation. That for me, the story that hit home in the backdrop was the killing of Fadel Shana, who was a Reuters cameraman in Gaza, who set up a tripod on a hillside 700 meters from a tank. And he literally filmed his own death. The tank fired what's called a flechette round. It does these little darts, and he filmed his own death. And like with this, they said, oh, well, it looked like it could be a weapon. And they absolved the Israeli military of any responsibility in that case as well. And there's also a Reuters cameraman who was killed at the beginning of this war.
Issam Abdullah in Lebanon.
Yes. Also no accountability. There's a record, there's a pattern.
Ayman's going to add a word.
There's also CNN correspondent Ben Wiedemann, who was actually shot by an Israeli sniper as well, or Israeli soldier in Gaza prior to the unilateral withdrawal back in 2005. And, the list of journalists, Western journalists, American journalists who have been hit by Israelis is long. And I don't know of any Israeli soldiers who have ever been held accountable to it. So it is important that, identifying, naming, holding our government, which to your point earlier, and to Mehdi's point is, they're being hit and shot and killed with our tax dollars. And I think that's important, that we, with the amount of money that we give the Israeli government, the impunity, the diplomatic cover, the obfuscation, that we do on behalf of the Israelis on the international stage has to come to an end. And by emphasizing that Shireen is an American and these other journalists are American, we as American citizens have the right and must demand accountability from our government with how our taxpayers are used. That doesn't take anything away from who Shireen was and who anyone else is and the incredible work that they do on the ground day in and day out. But we are here responsible for what our government does, and that's why we must hold our government accountable for its complicity in these events.
Before I go back to the audience, while you've got the mic, quick question. Anne made the good point about before October the 7th. You're not allowed to talk about, the world didn't exist before October the 7th, apparently. As someone who's on cable news, you and I both know one of the big challenges of being on cable with the time constraints, with the attention deficit spans, with the ad breaks, with all of the stuff, with the guest segments, context sometimes becomes a dirty word. How do you, I know you value context. You're someone who's reported from, I think you're the only person on American television who's lived in Gaza. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? So you are literally the expert on this. So Douglas Murray recently went on Joe Rogan and said, we need to talk to experts. You're the expert, right? So what do you do to make sure you get context on air? How hard do you have to fight to kind of get that context? Where you just mentioned Ben Wiedemann. Most people on cable would say, who is Ben Wiedemann?
You know, to be honest with you, it's become easier since I now have my own show. But when I didn't have my own show, I had to constantly pitch and remind and message executive producers and hosts of other shows that this doesn't just happen in a vacuum. There's something deeply wrong with everything that is taking place in Israel-Palestine that is forcing these types of events. And worse is that history keeps repeating itself. And we suddenly lose sight of the historical facts. I mean, for us, you know, again, when people talk about Palestinians leaving their land as if somehow Donald Trump is just going to wave a wand and Palestinians will wake up and want to leave, context is understanding the last 80 years, if not the last 100 years of a Palestinian struggle. And, you know, if you don't understand that, if you don't know that, you won't be able to understand and explain why Palestinians simply won't leave or why others won't facilitate that exodus. But it is extremely hard and it is extremely difficult to be able to, if you don't have your own platform and if you don't have the space to make those points, to constantly badger and message and pitch and try to get on the radar of people say, hey, wait a minute, you're not looking at the total picture and you're not even looking at the historical picture that brought us up to this moment.
Let's take the gentleman there who's waiting for us.
Thank you to Zeteo and all the journalists, the real true journalists, I would say, who took part in making that documentary. It's incredible to see what can happen through actual journalism. I have a question when you talk about like accountability for the government. I also feel like there needs to be like some level of accountability for like the field of journalism, because I remember when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, there was a Wall Street Journal reporter who was taken, you know, hostage by the government, and there was so much about like stand with the reporter and all of these newsrooms, like, you know, making shirts and making it a big deal. But, you know, like this fellow journalist of theirs that's an American dies. It seems like a lot of mainstream major reporters don't want to talk about it. And then you see all these journalists in Gaza getting killed regularly and sometimes even openly by the government. And there's no solidarity there. So it's like, it's hard to say that, okay, yeah, you respect these other journalists who are in your profession, but are they really journalists? Do you really have solidarity with people who like don't actually see your fellow journalists on the ground there as being humans?
It's a great question. Rula, I'm going to...
Well done.
You were nodding there, and you talked earlier about dehumanization. Ayman and I once did a segment, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, did we do a segment on Handover where we talked about, there was a journalist who talked about Ukraine. Do you remember when the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened? And we did that segment about, a lot of people did that video where the guy was like, these are blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. This is not the Middle East. Yeah. We can't believe what we're seeing. And it was kind of like, oh, wow, the quiet part out loud. They're just admitting what we've always assumed, that the blonde, blue-eyed folks have more value. Rula, is the lack of solidarity
even
because
worse.
These are Arab journalists?
Even worse. I'm sure everybody remembers when CNN was interviewing a representative, and she actually said on CNN, a Sunday show, she said, 13,000 Palestinians were killed. 13,000. And the overwhelming majority are children, 13,000 children. And the journalist on the other side on CNN, she said, at least they were not raped. And I will never forget, I was sitting on my couch, I choked on my own coffee, I repeated 3 times, trying to, did she just say that? Did she should say, you know, they were killed, yeah, never mind, but at least they were not raped. I shot, I believe, 8 emails to CNN saying, are you for real? Is this really happening? And then I was surprised because I was invited sometimes, so they would give you 3-4 minutes, and then they will unleash against you a bunch of people who will scream and yell and have no clue what we are talking about. And they were really paid very well, that was my understanding. But they were, I don't know if they're scared, these people, but then when I read that there's a memo at the New York Times telling them not to use the word ethnic cleansing, not to use the word, in the context of Palestine-Israel, not to use the word genocide, not to use the word refugees. And this is when you understand that is much worse than lack of solidarity. This is complicity. We saw for the last 19 months basically fabricating the consent for genocide. I teach a course at the University of Miami, propaganda, persuasion, and genocide. It all starts with words. Once you dehumanize human beings, once you criminalize them collectively, killing them is the easy part. And what our media did in this country, and this will go to the history books. I will never forget Noor Ayrakat, a Palestinian jurist, who actually wrote a tweet saying, we are watching Radio Rwanda. What we are seeing in US media is complicity. They're basically paving the way for American citizens, and luckily the citizens are much ahead of our media. They were preparing them to basically to what the Israelis were doing. I remember also an Israeli soldier on air twice over was asked by Abby Phillips, who actually I respect and admire, and one of the few who would have Palestinians. And she said, so you're fighting Hamas? And he said, no, we're not fighting Hamas. We're fighting Palestinians. And she, for a while, she said, you said you're fighting Hamas, right? And he said, no. And again, he repeated, we're fighting Palestinians. They were clear from day one with their intention, with their declaration. It's not a coincidence that there's a 500 statements, genocidal statements, that were basically given to the ICJ, the International Court of Justice.
Yes.
But our media basically not only ignored it, they tried to whitewash this so they can carry out the genocide. I hope they will be, one day there will be accountability within the media. I hope somebody can sue them.
There's, I always get the name of the book wrong, but it's Omar al-Akkad, the Canadian-Egyptian novelist, who has a book out, which I urge you all to read. And the title of the book, I'm going to get this wrong, but one day everyone will always have been against this.
Yeah.
And this idea that just like the Iraq War, where everyone today is like, oh, that was a mistake, that was bad. I think a lot of people will look back and say they were on the wrong side of this history, like Rwanda. Let's take that gentleman's question there, is waiting.
Thank you very much. Rula and Maggie, both of you have worked on both sides of the pond. Where does your voice resonate more? Is it back in Europe? Is it here? And ultimately, where is it more important to resonate? And I definitely have my own opinion. It should be here, because that's where the decision really is being made. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, you can go first.
My
you've got a book out in Europe right now.
It's not a coincidence that my book is out in Europe. Europe, absolutely, the public opinion is, 90% of the Europeans, maybe less, maybe 80, I would say absolutely have a different media, but also less involvement. And they don't have AIPAC, they don't have ADL, with that guy going to Israel saying, we need the Badger attacks in US campus, and then he's deemed as somebody who's fighting anti-Semitism. We don't have that in Europe.
Jonathan Greenblatt, just
actually,
for those not following.
In Europe, yeah, they have other issues. They have Meloni and Viktor Orban, and they have real fascists, but they have real media. And I am proud that my book is being published today, actually was released yesterday, in Italy, in 2 months in France and Spain. But I don't have an American publisher, so that tells you everything about the country that is supplying the weapons and making the, covering up diplomatically and politically.
Also, Rula's been fighting off multiple lawsuits in Italy from actual fascists. So give it up for Rula Jebreal, always fighting the good fight. And we are proud to have her as a Zeteo contributor. Just in answer to your question, look, to answer your question, where am I sitting right now? I'm sitting in New York City running a US media company. I don't know if I would be running this company in the UK. I don't know what my career path would have been had I stayed in London in 2015 and not moved to the US. I didn't plan this. I moved to the US to do a show for Al Jazeera English as a foreign journalist on a work visa. And yeah, I didn't see myself 10 years later having worked at The Intercept, then worked at MSNBC, and now running my own company that's split between DC and New York. I think you're right. The voices have to be here, right? This is where the decision-making is happening. We made this film here. We want people in the United States to watch this film. Another film that's come out recently that won the Oscar, No Other Land. That is a film that American policymakers and journalists need to watch because they need to see.
Foster more talent like yourself.
Say again?
How do you foster more talent such as yourself?
The only way we can foster more talent, I firmly believe this, is by sticking together those of us who actually agree on this issue. You know, one problem we have in progressive media spaces, progressive political spaces, is, you may have heard this phrase before, the left is a circular firing squad. We're also busy fighting each other that the fascists and the genociders are winning. And I have a real problem with that. I set up Zeteo not to fight with other people on the left, for sure. I have my disagreements with other people on the left. I have my disagreements with people in various communities and activists. But if we're all walking towards the same goal, which is kind of truth and stopping a genocide and fighting fascism, I think that's more important. I look at the right and there's such message discipline, right? They move so cohesively. No matter how much they hate each other personally, the talking points are there. They're in their WhatsApp groups getting their marching orders. And meanwhile, the left are like, well, you're a traitor. No, you're a traitor. No, you're a sellout. No, you're a sellout. So to answer your question, I actually am all about supporting other media. I love Democracy Now! I love my friends at Dropsite News. I love Sam Cedar. Like I'm all about supporting people who are trying to get towards the same goal. Even if we don't all agree 100%, I do think we have to support each other right now. Independent journalism is under assault. The media is under assault. And those of us who are in independent spaces, those of us who are taking stances that are unpopular, we gotta stick together, right? That for me is absolutely key. And we got time for one more question. I don't know if that gentleman is waiting for it. Do you want the last question?
Fortunately for you, I saw your episode with Islam Hajj, so I know that New York City is not necessarily your favorite city. How would you see that?
New York is definitely my favorite city tonight because you're out here in force to watch this screening.
So I want to start my question with a little anecdote. So I actually went to Baruch College, which is a few blocks away from here. It's one of the most famous Jewish communities, Jewish colleges in the United States of America. I'm a Palestinian-American. When I was there, I did take a Palestine-Israel class, and one of the moments that I will never forget when taking that class is I was the only Palestinian in that class. I would say like the other 75-80% were Jewish identifying, and like the overwhelming majority were Israeli, Israeli-American / Israeli. When we started the history lesson, beginning of the semester was, the creation of the state of Israel, Zionism as an ideology, all that. We got through Pandemic, everybody silently takes their notes. We got through, moments in Israeli history where there was terrorism and everyone silently takes their notes. When we get to the units about Hamas and the PLO, I would always notice that the Israeli students would always like snicker, make, jokes, and they would just react to it, right? And I could never, to this day, ever understand that cognitive dissonance, and I made my disdain loud in that classroom. And I'll never forget the way that people looked at me, surprised. Like, we're talking about Hamas over here, we're talking about the PLO over here. But when we talked about the Irgun and the Haganah and the Levi gang 3 months ago, you guys didn't have those same reactions. And the reason why I bring up this anecdote is I want to ask you guys, Ayman and Mehdi specifically, is for the last 18 months since the genocide started, don't you guys feel like, I personally feel like you guys do a disservice to the Palestinian community as a whole whenever anybody such as Piers Morgan or CNN or anybody comes out and says that Hamas is a terrorist organization, that there isn't the pushback to immediately point to the IDF, which has done magnitude worse actions than Hamas has ever done in their entire history. And I want to be very clear here, before you guys I want to be very clear here. This is not an endorsement of Hamas as a political entity. And I personally see Hamas as a political party, the same way that people would see the political, nobody looks at, for example, the Civil War and goes, who was the political party that was in charge during that time? They're a terrorist organization. Who was the political party?
Only because we're running out of time and you've spoken for a while. Do you want to end it with the question? What's the question? Is it that...
The question is, why don't you guys have more pushback when Hamas is given the terrorist designation and those same people will not label the IDF a terrorist organization?
Ayman, do you want to go first? I'll go second since he asked both of us. Or do you...
Why don't you go first since you've been on Piers Morgan and you can actually answer? And I'm not dodging your question, I'll answer your question, but I'm just going to say really quickly, I haven't been on Piers Morgan, so I haven't been asked that question. So I'm not sure you're asking me like how, if I was asked that question, how would I have defended it? I have not been on Piers Morgan, so I don't want to comment on something I haven't been on, but I'll let you answer that and then I'll give you my thoughts.
So, a couple of things. Thank you for watching the Hassan Minhaj interview. Number two, thank you for coming tonight to watch this film. Out of interest, did you like the film?
Of course, yes.
Okay. No, it's just interesting that it's always, since you asked the question bluntly, I'll reply bluntly. I do always appreciate when people say, come to a film that we made about Shireen Abu Akleh that most other people I think wouldn't have made, and Dion got rejected. And your question is framed around a disservice to the Palestinian community from me. But okay, but let's just deal with the specifics of your question. I've been on Piers Morgan, and actually Piers Morgan's been on my show. And I literally said what you said I didn't say. The tape is out there. I literally went to him and said, why isn't Israel considered a terrorist organization? Why isn't the quote unquote IDF, which by the way, Zeteo refuses to call it the IDF, it's not the Israel Defense Forces. It's an Israeli occupying force and we call it the Israeli military. I said to Piers Morgan, why don't you consider the Israeli military terrorist group? And he hid behind some...
And you asked him, why don't you condemn it?
Why don't you condemn it? And he hid behind pedantry about the definition of terrorism. So I think it's a little unfair. There's a lot to criticize me for, right? A lot to criticize me for. But I think it's unfair when people criticize me for either saying things that I didn't say or saying, why didn't you say this? And I'm like, I did, bro. I literally said it to Piers Morgan on his show and my show, and the tape is out there. And you're right. We should apply the label terrorism to what Israel is doing in Gaza, and not just what Israel is doing in Gaza, what the US government has done around the world. The Trump administration, which for some reason gets a pass from some sections of the left, is currently bombing Yemen. Oh, sorry, they've taken a break because they did a peace deal with the Houthis, apparently. They just killed 60 African migrants in a detention center. They're bombing Yemen. It's literally the definition of terrorism to try and bring about political change through the use of violence. That is 100% what the American military does, what the Russian military does, what the Israeli military does. So I agree with you. I've spent 15 years in public life arguing about this ridiculous term terrorism. I taught a course at Georgetown in 2017 where the entire course was about the misuse and abuse of the word terrorism in our media discourse. So I agree with you. This is not about, again, yes, you're right, neither of us are endorsing what Hamas did on October the 7th, but of course they're a political party. Of course they're a political movement. I've said it openly. In fact, many people have said to Piers Morgan, you can't just wish them out of existence, including the Israeli ministers, by the way, who've said you can't just get rid of them. So yes, we need to have a more nuanced conversation about this. 100% agree with you, but I think you're aiming your fire at the wrong person, with respect. And I would just add one thing. It's interesting you mentioned Irgun and Leahy and all of those groups. In the New York Times, I can't remember which year it was, but you can go back and look in the archives. It's still on the New York Times website. You do have Yitzhak Shamir saying, it's not terrorism when we do it. It's literally his quote out there. When Jews do it, it's not terrorism. So it's interesting. The wider point you make is 100% I agree with you.
I misworded my question, that's still there.
You what?
I said you, but I just see you guys as American Western media. Okay. And brown faces in that American Western media space, so that's why I didn't want to use the word you. And I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, you have to apologize. Ayman, do you want to take?
The short answer to that question is, I just don't think it matters. I really don't think it matters. It doesn't matter. That's not the issue. That's the thing that they want you to focus on. They want you to be preoccupied with that label. And it worked because you're here asking us, why aren't we using that label? And I say, whatever label you want to assign to whatever issue, it doesn't obfuscate the reality. There is a brutal military occupation. Palestinians have a right to resist. Period. End of discussion. However you want to use that, and I use the word resist because resistance comes in all shapes and forms, whether it's art, economic, boycott, whatever. That's enshrined in law. You want to get hung up on how Americans define that is playing into their hands, playing into their games, because then, as we now have seen, they use words to distract from what the core issue is, and we're seeing that here nowadays, when people start saying things like, oh, calling for a boycott, divestment, of sanction is anti-Semitic, saying chants, using the word intifada, which is literally on the cover of Time magazine. Last year, Time magazine wrote the word uprising, which is the literal definition of the word intifada, and nobody accused Time magazine of being anti-Semitic. But when you fall into this trap and not recognize who your audience is, who you're speaking to, where you're trying to take your audience from point A to point B, then you're just gonna get hung up on these things. And we're gonna keep fighting on the terms and the terminology that people want to keep you confined in. And this is a much bigger issue, much broader issue. And to Mehdi's point, I mean, you can go into those spaces. I am not in the position where Mehdi is. I am not going on to debate Piers Morgan. I'm in a position where I interview people and I'm trying to get people to say, wait a minute, there's something different here. Not all Palestinians are Hamas, and trying to paint all of Palestinians as one way or the other is a disservice to their national struggle for liberation.
I think we've got 2 minutes left where we have to leave this venue. If you have a short question, the lady here, we can take a very quick last question.
I do, I have a short question. My question is, how would you as media professionals what pressure points do you find to get people to open up, to create connections and get the answers you want, but within like the community of people who are just people? How do we make those connections, and what are those pressure points that we can?
The most important answer for me is fear. Most people are governed by fear. Fear of losing their jobs, fear of losing status, fear of being labeled. And if you break that fear barrier, you will be able to make that connection. I meet people from all walks of life, some in American government, and I'm sure you have as well, who are afraid, and their fear is because of the political risk or the political cost of speaking out about this issue. I meet people who, in their own spaces, whether they're just very respectable professionals, they're afraid to speak up about this issue, and they're afraid to kind of come out and take a position on it because of the consequence of what they may be labeled as.
Time is short, Dan, I want to give you the last word. As someone who reported on this film, you got people to open up to, even if some of them we had to hide their identities, you got people to open up across the world. You've done it your entire career. How do you do it?
I think Ayman's right. You need to find those connections, and you need to break through that fear, and you find commonality. You know, everybody has a story to tell, and everybody wants to tell their story. Everyone in here has an incredible story, and you just need to make those connections and listen. We're trained to listen to people, and I think that's lost a lot, especially in the news business. There's a lot of shouting and not enough listening.
I'm going to say 3 things before we head out. Thank you so much to our panel, to Ayman, to Rula, to Dion. Thank you again to the makers of the film. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm just going to leave you with 3 things. Number 1, please share whokilledshireen.com with everyone you know on your socials, with your friends and family. You've seen what happened to No Other Land. Rula mentioned her book. It's hard to get this message out there, so please do try and share it with everyone you can, whokilledshireen.com. Number 2, if you're not a Zeteo subscriber, please do become a Zeteo subscriber tonight to support independent journalism. A free press is not free. And if you already are a Zeteo paid subscriber, thank you so much. And number 3, no matter how shitty life gets, don't give up hope. That's what the bastards want. So don't give up hope. Stay hopeful. Fight the good fight. Thank you all for coming tonight. Appreciate you all. Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.